One. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Lagerquist. I'm here at Vine Faith in Action in Mankato. Today, we have the great pleasure of hearing about the Connections Ministry, a shelter in Mankato that has moved to a new home and just recently got some money for a staff person. So we expect bigger things even from the ministry. And here to present is the co-director, I believe, is the title, Colette Rody-Grund. And Colette, I'm just going to hand it off to you, and please tell us a little bit about Connections Ministry.
Okay. Well, I'm so glad to be with you all. My co-director, Erica Kozer, and I have presented at Vine in years past, but a lot changes very quickly in our ministry. So we are glad to come and tell you about the updates. There are a lot of them right now. So we are in an exciting period in our shelter where we are just growing by leaps and bounds as an organization. So let me give you a little history for those of you who maybe aren't as familiar with the organization. We started 4 years ago as a partnership of downtown churches. We were all seeing the same people coming to us for financial assistance, with food, with utility bills that were overdue, with housing issues. And we all felt like we weren't helping in a way that was really making a difference, but that everybody was giving $10 here and $10 there, a gas card or a bag of food, and we just kept seeing people coming back. So we gathered to talk about what we could do, and housing just kept coming up. At that time, Partners for Affordable Housing was in operation with their 2 shelters that they have now. They had fewer rooms at that point than they do now. And the Salvation Army was operating the overnight men's shelter from November through the end of March. But other than that, there was not shelter especially for emergencies, for women and families. And so everywhere we turned, people kept telling us about this need for shelter. And when we looked at our own resources as churches, all of the downtown churches have the same problem of having enormous buildings that are no longer full. And so we have in all of our buildings classrooms, sometimes whole wings that are not in use. And we are, paying for that space, cleaning it, heating it, but we weren't using it for anything. And so we started to think about what it would mean to house people in our church buildings. And that idea took off very quickly. So it started around the time that my youngest was born. We like to refer to her as our shelter baby, because she literally came to shelter with me every day in that first season and helped check in and greeted all of our guests as they came in. And she was about 6 months old when we started. So we opened for the first season in the fall of 2017. And we rotated between 6 church buildings. At that time, everybody hosted for a week in their building, and then it would move on to the next place. We got a trailer to move all of our cots and the guests' belongings. And then every Sunday, we would set up in a new place, welcome people in. And we always did our intake at that point at Centenary Methodist, just because their breakfast program served a lot of the same people, and we knew people would know where Centenary was. And we felt like we needed to have the same location for people to show up if they needed shelter every day. So we did our shelter that way for 2 seasons. The first year we were open from the very end of October until mid-April. And we went from 6 hosting congregations to 9 by the end of that season. The second season, we opened in mid-October, and then we had 11 hosting congregations for that second season. Some were partnering, some smaller congregations joined together. One would offer building and one would offer volunteers. And then before our third season, one of our partner congregations, the Covenant Family Church down on Riverfront, said to us, we've been talking a lot about how we use our building and what a joy it's been for us to have the shelter. And we know that you, as a shelter board, are talking about eventually having a permanent location. So we wondered if you wanted to try out having a permanent location in our building. And so they offered that really out of the blue to us. And we figured that was what was meant to happen. This happens to us all the time, that things are offered to us that we didn't even know that we needed. And we try always to say yes when people offer. So we moved into Covenant Family last year for our third season. We knew it wasn't going to be the right space for us long-term because it's very small, but we couldn't pass up the offer of a trial location. And we learned a lot about what it would mean to not move our guests, but instead to move our volunteers. And there were a lot of things that were different about that season, but we knew for sure that it was the right thing for our guests. It was harder on volunteers and harder on staff, but our guests loved having a place where they could have the same room, the same bed often for the whole time that they were with us. Last spring, of course, when COVID hit, we were still in shelter and not knowing what precautions we really needed, but knowing that we were in a tiny space that was completely full. We had, I think, 23 beds out of 25 filled when COVID hit. And volunteers, the same thing last year, said, we don't think we should be there. We moved everybody to the Hilton Garden Inn downtown. That was, I think, the last weekend in March that we moved everybody. The Hilton gave us an amazing deal. They put all of our guests on one floor, and they charged us the same rate as the cheapest hotel in town. And they provided meals from Olive's restaurant for dinner every night. And so our guests stayed in that hotel, some of them just for a week or two before they moved to housing. And a few stayed all the way from the end of March until the end of July when they were finally housed. We had a great partnership with the city of Mankato, Blue Earth County Supportive Housing as well. And we were able to get everybody who was eligible for a housing voucher got one and are now housed. So we had the highest success rate of housing that we've ever had by the end of last season, partly because of COVID, actually. So, we know all of the terrible things that have happened because of COVID, but one of the good things is that the restrictions around housing vouchers and housing support programs, both statewide and federal programs, the barriers are way, way down. All the rules have been relaxed. So many, many more people are eligible for housing and getting those vouchers. And those are long-term vouchers. So people that have gotten housed because of the pandemic will likely be able to stay housed permanently. So that is exciting news. We, all of last season, knowing that we couldn't stay at our Covenant Family location, we're exploring other options. And over the course of about a year, we had conversation with First Presbyterian Church about their largely unused second floor. And by June, we had signed a lease for that with them for, it's just a 1-year lease, but our intention is to stay several years. And we had a contract with the city of Mankato to renovate the space, to add an extra bathroom and a full kitchen so that it could operate. Their education floor could now operate as a shelter. So we opened at First Presbyterian in mid-October. We have so much more space than we've ever had. And I actually have a video. Mike, are you going to share that, or do you want me to?
Whichever works. I've just got it as a backup. I've got it queued up. If you'd like me to, I can do
Okay,
that.
if you've got it queued up, why don't you go ahead? So this is because people can't necessarily come in for a physical tour, we did this video tour. So you'll be able to see some of our staff and the space at First Presbyterian.
Welcome to Connection Shelter. I'm Pastor Erica Kozer. I am the pastor of Community Connections here at the shelter, and we're so excited to give you a virtual tour of our space this afternoon. We are now housed here at First Presbyterian Church on their second floor. It is a beautiful space, lots of room for our guests to spread out. Churches have done a beautiful job of adopting rooms and decorating them to be warm and welcoming. And we are excited to show you what this new chapter of Connections Ministry looks like. I'm Pastor Colette Brody-Grund, the pastor of Administration and Development here at the shelter. We are standing in the entryway off of Hickory Street, and this is where we do intake for our guests. Because of COVID precautions, we are having guests come in one person or one family at a time. We do a bag search and health screening and welcome them in for the night. And then they head upstairs for a rest in their rooms before dinner. All right, follow us, come upstairs. This is our kitchen space, and in addition to food being prepared here, this is our volunteer check-in space. So when you come as a volunteer to the shelter, this is the first place that you come to sign in and get oriented for the night. And then the meal team serves out of the kitchen. We just pull a little table across the door, and the guests come right to the kitchen to get their food. So welcome to one of our singles rooms. This is actually one of our men's rooms. We have 6 guests to our multiple singles rooms. We have 2 rooms for men and 1 room for single women. This year, one of the big changes that we have had to do because of COVID is move dining tables into each room. And so our guests are sort of in a pod that they share meals with, that they share space with, and it just keeps our contacts amongst each other decreased so that we are not at risk of spreading germs. So our guests settle in here. They're welcome to leave their items here for the whole day and come back each night. They're guaranteed their bed for the week that they are here and going forward. And then they eat and play games and hang out in their rooms in the evenings. Welcome to our movie room. This is the first time in the history of Connection Shelter that we have had a designated movie room. We and our guests are quite excited about this space. So this is just one option of the places that our guests can go to have some quiet, relaxing time after dinner. And also a place where if some of our guests need to stay up late, they can be in here without bothering anybody else. So we are excited about this space, not only as a movie space, but when we need to have staff meetings, there's lots of room for us to spread out appropriately, and it becomes a multi-use space that we are gonna head next door to the office. Welcome to the Connections office. This is the first time in all of our seasons that we have actually had a permanent office that we can settle into and conduct the business of Connections Ministry. So Pastor Colette, myself, each have desks here. We have phones here. And we also have been blessed this year to be able to put in a security system so that we can monitor the hallways. Our staff can settle into this space. And lots of work gets done here at all hours of the day and night. Let's go to the community room next. We are now here in our community room. This is the corner of the building opposite where we come in. And this is another one of the spaces for guests to relax after dinner and to stay up as late as they want without disturbing anybody else. We've got books in here, puzzles, games. We also have a computer for our guests to use if they are looking for housing or work or checking their email. Next, we will go and see a family room. We are now here in one of our smaller rooms that we are using for families. There are 3 or 4 beds in all of these family rooms, and this is nice to be able to give families a bit more privacy, especially those who have young kids, then they can set their own family bedtimes. Families are not dining in their rooms for the most part because these rooms aren't big enough to allow for a table. We do have a dining room that we will show you in just a minute where those families come. If you would like to get involved in work here at the shelter, we invite you to volunteer with us. It's really easy. Go to our website, www.connectionsshelter.org, and click on volunteer. There's a spot you can go there to sign up on our Sign Up Genius page. You are welcome to check it out. If it's your very first time, you'll get information about what your job entails, and we just welcome volunteers to come and walk with our guests and to learn more about what those experiencing homelessness in the Mankato area are facing. We also invite you to get involved by donating. We do take some in-kind donations, but it depends from week to week what we need. So if you are interested in a donation of items, we ask that you would call us directly to work that out. We also need financial donations always to support our staff. And you can donate to us either by giving me a call at the shelter phone number, or you can go on that same website that Pastor Erica mentioned, and there's a donate button there. Thanks for joining us for our virtual tour. We hope to see you in our space as a volunteer.
Bravo. All right, I apologize that the video was a little bit jumpy, but we have, there's a pastor here in town, Dan Crandall at Belgrade Avenue Methodist, who he and his wife have experience as professional video editors. So he did all of that gorgeous video for us. And if you were able to watch it again, I can send you all the YouTube link. You'll see that all of that moving is actually like him walking through the shelter space. It's very cool. So we are pleased to be able to share that with everybody.
May I ask a question about the video?
Yes, go ahead.
First of all, I watched it on Facebook or something, and I think it's a great video, and you both look so nice in it. But I have a question about the movie theater.
Yeah.
Is that something where people could donate movies then?
Yes, we actually put out a call for movie donations
Okay.
a week and a half ago.
Okay, I haven't seen that, but
We've had a great response,
Okay.
but we would gladly take more.
Okay.
Some of the people watch a movie every night, so they will go through a lot of different
Yeah.
choices.
Yeah.
The
My
only-
other question about the movie theater is those seats are so close together. Do you space the people? Do they wear masks? How does that work?
Yes, our guests have to wear masks in any common space. So when they're in the hallways or the bathrooms or the community room or the movie room, then they have to wear masks. And the only place they don't have to wear masks is in the rooms where they're sleeping. And we do ask them to spread out, and they've been pretty good about that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we had to institute a pretty strict mask policy last week. We've had the mask policy all along, but it always happens that once people have been in shelter for a few weeks, everybody starts to feel like family and that they let their guard down. And so now we have a one warning policy, and if you have to get a second warning, then you have to take a night off of shelter.
Okay.
Nobody wants to do that, so they've been much better about wearing those masks since we instituted that.
Yeah. And so do you have disposable ones available there?
We do.
Okay.
Yeah, we've had a bunch of donations, so we have a closet full of PPE, as much as our guests and volunteers need. So that feels safe. We did have the public health department walk through the shelter with us before we opened. And that was where we made the change to put the dining tables in people's rooms, because we were planning on 2 separate dining rooms. We still have the one separate dining room, but that one there are only probably 4 or 6 people in there at a time. And the other ones, everybody's dining either in their family group or with 4 to 6 people in their sleeping rooms. So we feel like we are doing everything we can to keep our guests safe. And this means also that most of our volunteer positions are very low contact with guests, which is also a good thing. So our staff have a lot of contact with guests, but volunteers, we have found ways to make it still a meaningful volunteer experience, but to limit that guest contact. Because honestly, if our guests are going to get sick, it's going to be from volunteers, because they are largely outdoors, except when they're with us. So they are among the safer populations from getting infected. So we don't want to make it more dangerous by having them come into shelter.
Colette?
Yeah.
I think I missed how many people the new Connection shelter could house. And then also, how does that compare with the need? And also, how long do people usually stay?
So we have a capacity of, we have 35 beds. That doesn't necessarily mean that we will have 35 people when we are at capacity. So we have right now, you saw that in the video, I said that we had 2 men's rooms and 1 women's room. We now have 4 men's rooms and 2 women's rooms. And then we have 2 rooms that we are flexing right now. In one of those rooms, there's a family with kids, and in the other is a couple. But when couples come in together, we always say to them, we'll put you in a room together, but if we have a family with children that wants to come in, then we will split couples into men and women's rooms separately to make room for families. So right now we have, I think, 2 men's beds and 3 women's beds. But all of the rooms have people in them right now. That one couple could be split if we had another family that wanted to come in. But then sometimes we would have a family in a room that has 4 beds, but it's a family of 3. So we wouldn't be able to fill that last bed. As to how it compares to the need, I think that's something that we're still figuring out. So we've only been close to capacity in the last 10 days or so. It took us a lot longer to fill up this year than it did in previous years. And people have been staying with us for shorter periods of time. So just to give you an idea, last season, over the course of the whole season, we housed 96 people, 97 maybe, partly because 12 or 14 of our beds out of 25 were filled by the same people for the whole season. Sometimes families have a really hard time saving up enough money for deposits on an apartment, or they have debts that they have to pay off before they can get an apartment. Some people are just harder to house for a variety of reasons. This year, we've been open for 7 weeks, and we have already served almost 80 people. So people are just turning over much more quickly. Some of that, I think, is because of social service agencies that are more able to work with people. Part of it, I think, is because people are finding other options more quickly. I don't think it feels particularly safe to our guests to be staying in shelter with that many people. So we have people who will come and stay for a couple of weeks, and then they'll say, I found a friend or a family member that's willing to take me in. And we always say, if that doesn't work, you can come back. But we right now only have a handful of people that have been with us since we opened. And many people who've only been with us for a few nights, and then they move on to whatever comes next. And that's not always permanent housing. But sometimes it's a treatment program. Sometimes it's a mental health facility. Sometimes it's a friend or a family, or we have a lot of people that end up getting stuck, that they were meaning to be traveling through, or they traveled here to stay with somebody and it didn't work out. And they are looking then to not be in Mankato. So we do help people move on to other locations if that's what they want to do. It's a wide variety this year.
It's quite a huge network that comes in to serve. I mean, I'm just awed by all of the people that support, especially the piece about moving on and getting the social services and the resources and the connections. It's in the money that it must cost quite a bit to support this program in the.
Yeah, so we have supporting our ministry, we have 20 partner congregations. That's the heart of our partnerships. But the thing that's really great about Mankato as a community is that all of the social service agencies are in communication with each other. And that's another piece that COVID has really, really strengthened. We have weekly conferencing calls about our unhoused people that we didn't used to have, so that we're working much more closely together than we ever have. We have a lot of people that support the shelter financially. So we are supported by those churches, but we are also supported by a lot of individuals, almost entirely local donors. We have a few that have Mankato connections but live elsewhere now. And then we have foundation support, which this year will be a significant part of our budget. You might have seen in the free press that we just got a very large grant from the Otto Bremer Trust. And that is enabling my co-director, Erica Kozer, to go full-time at the shelter. That is a dream that she and I have had since we started this thing, that we have both felt called to do this ministry. And she is now able to leave her position at Centenary Methodist and come full-time to Connections starting January 1st. So that is enabled by that Bremer grant. So we are really excited about that. And that will enable her to work on deepening all of those partner connections. And she's largely responsible for all of those partnerships, as well as volunteers. I do all of the administrative stuff and all of the money stuff.
Thank you. That's just incredible.
Yeah, it's
North
grown.
Carolina, geographically, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Geographically, Mankato, North Mankato, you said people passing through.
Yeah. So we get people who have come from all over, and who want to end up being in different places. But we do try, especially people who stay with us for a long time, we do try to get them settled in the community. And that is partly so that the support network that they build while they're in shelter will continue to serve them when they get out of shelter. And, one of the things that we hear from people who find housing is how much they miss the community that they develop in shelter. So one of our goals for 2021 is to find some ways to have our shelter community meet outside of shelter, to figure out what that looks like, so that some of those former guests can come back and still be in contact with us, and so that there's some transition between being in shelter and being housed, and that you don't lose your whole community just because you move out of shelter.
Well, Colette, I just have to say congratulations, and the video is fantastic. It's really helpful just to get a sense for the space and what you're doing in it. And I have to say, I imagine you both are pretty wonderfully scrappy. When I learned that this is the first time you've actually had an office, like doing all of that work is outside of having a physical space is really impressive.
Thank you. We have to give a ton of credit to Centenary Methodist and my congregation, Bethlehem Lutheran. Those congregations have donated a significant portion of our time to this ministry, and Bethlehem continues to do that. So we have officed the ministry out of those two churches for this whole time. And now we finally have a separate office, but those two churches still get a lot of calls that are related to shelter ministry, and they have, a lot of ownership of it. So they don't want to give up that ownership just because it has moved to a new building.
And so now that you're beginning to be settled in this space, what are some of your greatest needs right now?
One of the things that we are thinking about right now is our laundry situation. Because we've had such high turnover this year, the laundry very quickly gets out of control. And we are forming a laundry team right now that will pick up laundry at the shelter, and they can do it in their own homes. We were trying to avoid doing that because we didn't know, especially in the early days of COVID, if that would be safe for people. But the health department has said, we're not as worried about transmission from touching objects that sick people have touched. And as far as we know, we don't have any sick people that are sleeping in our beds. So we are trying right now with First Presbyterian to figure out if there is a place in the church building for us to put in our own laundry. Because then our overnight staff, who on nights where everyone is calm and sleeping, have very little to do for hours at a time overnight. And they keep saying, we would love to do laundry. Can you get a machine in the building? So that's one of the things that we're working on. And it is still part of our goal to have more full-time staff. Erica will not be able to carry it as the only full-time staff. So our hope would be for me to eventually be full-time as the other director, and for our shelter manager to be full-time as well. Right now we have our weekday manager and a weekend manager. But if we were able to make that weekday position full-time, that would really be a benefit, because our shelter manager is the one that sees our guests most regularly and ends up having the closest relationships, the most trust with our guests. As a part-time position, she really only has time to manage emergency situations. But if she were able to be a full-time employee, she would have more time to help Erica and I with case management. And especially with some of our guests who are less trusting, especially of government programs, which most of the housing programs are, if the shelter manager can be more involved in case management, that helps our people to trust it, because the shelter manager is the most trustworthy person in the eyes of our guests.
I noticed in the video three short flights of steps. I'm hoping that there's an elevator that serves that floor as well.
There is. That was one of the pieces that we knew for sure we needed in a more permanent location. We did not have that at Covenant Family, and there were a handful of guests that we weren't able to serve at all because of that, and many other guests that have respiratory issues or ongoing injuries. So that really, the elevator is great. It's really helpful to our guests, even those who don't have any kind of disability, but just come in really tired after a long day. It's just one of those extra pieces that helps them feel like somebody cares.
And I know First Presbyterian is one of the oldest churches in downtown. Excuse me, is this in a section that was built, I'm guessing probably in the 50s or so, or?
There have been a number of additions onto the building. So some of it, I think, was probably built in the 50s, but there is part of it that is early 1900s. I don't know the exact date. The parts that where the stained glass windows are, for example, those are older parts of the building. So that's one of the pieces that makes the washing machine a little tricky. We already had to do some plumbing work to add an extra bathroom, and there isn't any place to put a washing machine on the hallway that has plumbing. So that's one of the tricky things about being in an old building. We had to add electrical as well for the kitchen, but the city and Web Construction did a great job working together to make all of that possible. We just finished the kitchen on Sunday. So we have a fully functional kitchen, all appliances in. We don't have showers, Elizabeth. That again is a plumbing issue. And it's a safety issue as well. So we have many people that stay in the shelter that are addicted to various substances. And for that reason, we don't have locks on any of our doors. We do have bathroom locks, but they're all multi-person bathrooms. So those doors don't get locked. And any place that we ever were in a church that had locks on the doors, we had problems with that, with people doing things that they're not allowed to do in the shelter in those bathrooms. And we worried about that, how we would supervise showers if we had them. And so we decided that was not something that we would offer, because we know the Salvation Army has showers and anyone can use those, whether they are using Salvation Army services for anything else. And Centenary Methodist, as part of its Holy Grounds breakfast program, also have showers that are available for anybody who needs them.
Colette, with what you mentioned with some of the people that may have some addiction issues and health concerns, have you had to turn anybody away right at the door for safety for the rest of the guests?
Sure. Yes, that does happen. So we are what's called a damp shelter, which means that if people come in under the influence of various things, that is fine. We don't require people to be sober to stay with us. They're not allowed to use any substances in the shelter, but if they use right before they come in, they're still allowed to come. The only exception to that is if they are a danger to themselves or other people. That's the only reason that anybody gets turned away. So we have had, for instance, we just had a guest that we had to tell that they couldn't come back because they have an addiction to prescription medication, and they had shared some of that prescription medication with other guests. So that's something that can't happen. So it's not the addiction as much as it was the sharing of medication. Sometimes with mental health things, it gets severe enough that we recognize that we're not able to give the level of care that is needed. So sometimes people go to the emergency room in that situation, sometimes to the South Central Crisis Center that's here in town. So those are the two main reasons. The only thing that we ever kick anybody out for that isn't using a substance in the shelter, that would be for violence. So if anyone is violent toward another guest or violent towards themselves, that's an automatic dismissal. But we like to tell both our people and our supporters that we have very, very few rules at the shelter, and that is purposeful. We know that when people are in crisis, rules are not necessarily what you need. We have rules to keep people safe, but we want to respect people's ability to make their own decisions as much as possible and to not take away what little autonomy they have left.
Thank you.
So is the evening meal the only meal that they get there at the shelter?
So that is the only hot meal that we provide. We have been, Holy Grounds is now doing only 4 days a week. They had been at 6 days a week, and they're only doing grab and go right now because of COVID. So on the days that they don't serve, we always have food available. Well, every day we have breakfast food available. We don't serve it. People serve themselves if they want to eat before they leave. We always have an abundance of food at the shelter. So very often people who are going to work or who know that they won't be able to make it to the Salvation Army for the lunch meal will pack a lunch before they leave the shelter. So if you're staying with us, you technically could be fed by us for all of your meals. But the evening meal is the only hot meal that's actually served.
Okay. So then is our food items something that you need, or is that, do you just like need the funding toward that or funds toward that? How do you go about getting?
All
food?
of the food that we get comes in through donations. We don't buy, it's very rare. So like we will buy a Christmas meal for our guests to cook at the shelter together on Christmas Day, but otherwise everything comes in by donations. So most of that comes through our partner congregations. Every week there is a congregation or two that are hosting that week, and they bring in the meals. We do have community members not connected to churches that bring meals as well. Erica coordinates all of that. So if anybody is interested in providing a meal or providing food Erica's the one to contact. Depending on what we need that week, often churches will donate other things like coffee or breakfast items. There's a list that goes out to the hosting congregation every week to say, here are the things that we need. Sometimes cleaning products are on that list, sometimes toilet paper or paper towels, those kind of things. There's very little of either food or supplies that we use donated money to buy. We always ask for donations. People love to give actual things more than just writing a check. And so we try to provide as many opportunities for people to actually go and shop and bring what they've bought to be shared. The money goes almost entirely to staffing.
Colette, there is so much goodness and there's so much heartwarming. It's just inspiring to see how the communities come together. And I know it's a very close network of these 20 churches, but when people hear about this goodness, it inspires more goodness. So my question is, how do you tell the story? What are the best vehicles for telling the story of connections?
Yeah, I think that's part of what we are trying to figure out as Erica and I have more time to do that. So that's one of the reasons that we made the video so that it could be widely shared. That's one of the reasons we do presentations like this. And every time we do one, we get an invitation to do another. So we've presented at pretty much every organization around town at one point. And then we do have a newsletter that goes out quarterly. I'm trying to think of our social media is where a lot of our good news gets shared. But our shelter manager, who unfortunately had to leave us early this season because of a health concern, she was our social media maven. And Erica and I are still figuring out how to do that as well as she did. But yes, I think that's one of the things we're always working on. How do we get the word out, and how do we help people understand not only what it's like to be homeless in this community, but how simple it is for the community to make it easier for those who are unhoused. And our best storytelling comes from the people who volunteer. They share it on their social media, they talk to their friends. That's often how we get our biggest donations, either of time or of money, is that somebody has heard the story from a friend and thought, amazing, what can I do?
Yeah, I think one of the big stories is how this has become a whole of community. It sounds like you've got the entire community, which has also got to mean a lot for the welcoming attitude of recognizing the goodness in everyone, including those who are homeless, and accepting and receiving their story with compassion. It sounds like you've worked so wonderful at creating this whole of community, and I think that's a story also.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, we set out to provide shelter and food, but the community is by far the most valuable thing, both to our volunteers who have opportunities to learn things that they never knew about their neighbors and about themselves, and especially to our guests. I can't tell you how many times people have said, I had given up on ever finding a place that felt like home until I came here, or nobody has made me feel like I was worth anything until I came here. It's just such a beautiful thing, and that's by far my favorite part of this work, is getting to hear our guests tell us how good it is to be in a place where they are welcome and where they are loved.
Anybody else have any questions you'd like to, or Colette, was there anything else that you wanted to talk about?
Gosh, I don't know. I don't think so. I think I covered everything. Uh, Everything changes so often at Connections that I know, like, by the end of the week, something will be different than what I have told you today. But again, that's part of our design. We said from the very beginning that we wanted to be a nimble organization, so that as offers were made of things that we thought we could use, we could just say yes and figure out how it was going to work as we go. And that we would never be so set in the way that we're doing things that we wouldn't be able to change when we knew we needed to. So it's never boring.
All right. Do you want to share with us again where people can go to find out more information or to donate?
Yeah, so our Facebook page, it's just Connections Ministry, is always the most up to date. We work hard to keep our website updated as well. That is connectionsshelter.org. There's 2 S's right in the middle. It looks weird when you type it, but it's correct. And you can also email myself or Erica at any time. Both of us are just Pastor, our name. So Pastor Colette or Pastor Erica at connectionsshelter.org.
All right. Well, wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing the time with us. And we'll get this posted to our virtual Vine page, hopefully yet this afternoon. So it could be up there, and we'll do some sharing to make sure that people can find it and get more information about the Connections Ministry here in Mankato. So one last chance, folks, if anybody has any questions or comments.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your good question.
I'm so glad to hear about what you're doing.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming today. And don't forget, vinevolunteers.com, and then go to Virtual Vine, and you can see upcoming programs as well as the recordings that we've done here for past programs. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.